Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the pair behind the new webcomic, The Afterrealm, as well as two creators behind a whole lot of comics. It's Michael Oeming and Taki Soma. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man.
So, I want to bring you guys back a few years. I want to start in a really random place. A few years back at Emerald City Comic Con, I was going around doing quick 5-question interviews with Multiversity Comics about comic creators as people, not just as people who make comics. And we interviewed you, Mike. And one of the questions we had was specifically related to what fad from yesteryear most people wanted to come back the most. And you said Doritos 3Ds because Taki has been looking for them for forever.
Yes.
Did you guys ever find them?
No, I've emailed the company and begged them to bring it back.
Yeah, she actually got dill pickles to come back, but she wrote to dill
pickle potato chips.
Yeah, got that to happen. We can't get the 3D Doritos thing to happen.
Oh
We've tried.
God!
We even looked on eBay to see if somebody had like an old carton of them or some crazy stuff like that, but
I have medical issues and I shouldn't have Doritos 3D at all, but I'm willing to risk my health.
She's allergic to 3D.
Most people are. I'm more of a 4-dimensional eater personally. It was funny. Ever since then, I every once in a while I'll see you guys pop up, and I'm like, I wonder if they ever found those Doritos.
That just made me sad.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to start the podcast off on a sad note. I was hoping you found them. I did a cursory search today just to make sure I was like fully aware of what they were. And this one article said that they were back, and I was like, oh my god, they're back. But apparently it was a fraud.
Well, we haven't looked in a while, so
That's true.
Yeah, you've given us a reason to go on tomorrow. So.
Yeah. But my body is like, nah. Just give up.
So we're not here to talk about Doritos 3Ds entirely. It's mostly about the Afterrealm, your guys' new webcomic. So I want to kind of go front to back on how these kinds of things happen. And, from like beginning all the way to promotion, making money off the ideas. I wanted to start talking about idea creation because, near as I can tell, this is your third comic together. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds right.
Synergy and Rapture before this, but you clearly like working together.
And you could count United States of Murder Incorporated, which Brian Bendis writes.
Oh, okay.
We're all kind of involved in that.
Yeah.
But you guys you guys clearly like working together, which makes sense as you're married. I'm kind of curious, like, what is your idea creation process like? Do you guys just like sit down at dinner and like just kind of throw things off at each other just randomly, or do you guys have a more formal process?
We generally talk about storytelling constantly. in general, we just enjoy deconstructing stories and building worlds and talking about characters and stuff like that all the time. It's just our hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's basically where it starts. And if we have a solid idea to bounce off, then that's when we have a story.
Yeah. So sometimes there's a story idea that we've had that we'll start discussing with each other that builds into something. Other times it's something that we'll kind of stumble upon, through conversations or observations about friends or observations. Like, people ask that question, where do ideas come from? And everybody kind of mocks it like it's a dumb question. But I actually have, I think, a good answer. Ideas come from listening to everything around you, whether it's sometimes you'll hear a phrase and that phrase might trigger an idea.
Oh.
Exactly. So we do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I totally agree because it's interesting. There's like an added wrinkle too. Like, it's not the same type of listening, but sometimes I'll be on social media and somebody tweets something random or like posts something on like Instagram or Facebook, and all of a sudden I have an idea for an article that kind of has something to do with it, but not a lot. And it's like sometimes there can be kindling in the oddest places for like bigger ideas.
Yeah, sometimes I pray that what I think I just saw or heard isn't what it actually is because it gave me a good idea, and then I double check that thing that gave me the idea, And then like if it's actually just the same thing and I've just echoed it in my head, I'm like, oh crap. But then sometimes you get lucky and you go like, wow, that's not what it was at all, but I got this great idea out of it accidentally.
Yeah.
Like mishearing song lyrics or something, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, it all works like that.
Yeah.
Mishearing lyrics.
Yeah.
I was actually reading an old interview you guys had done about Rapture, and you guys talked about how originally, I think it was supposed to be about zombies, not cannibals. Was that
Yeah.
true? Yeah, and I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting because like it's kind of like with the way that you guys work. I imagine being around each other all the time. I imagine idea development is a very fluid process where you guys are kind of, if you're talking about story a lot, then it evolves and evolves and evolves in a very unique way. Is that kind of how it works?
Definitely. We,
Oh, for
we,
sure.
we talked the crap out of stuff. And especially like at that time, when we started putting together Rapture, Walking Dead is still huge, but this was probably like 2009.
Mm-hmm.
This is before the show. The comic had already been giant, and there were so many billion other zombie books still, which is still going on, and many of them are really good. But we realized we should probably do something else because it's just being saturated, and the story didn't hinge on the zombie aspect
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been a kind of a more ridiculous addition to the story if we had zombies.
of it. Yeah, and both zombies and cannibals still fed in, no pun intended, but fed into that idea of like the world ending and things being that desperate and upside down and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was Taki. Taki also reversed when we did Synergy together, and it was originally like a mother and daughter story. And Taki has her own special relationship with her father who's passed and stuff, but we also realized there just weren't father-daughter stories out there. There's not any.
Mm-mm.
I won't say there's any, but there's just not enough that I could point a finger at even.
Right. There isn't a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about it, and it's like I was thinking, I was like, oh wait, what about the road? Wait, that was father son, and then I bet if you kind of go through it, it's quite often father son or maybe mother daughter, but not a lot of father daughter. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the origin story of the Afterrealm? Like how did that kind of come together? Was it like an amalgam of other ideas you guys had, or is it just like something that just came to be and it just started growing?
I think of all the different stuff that we've created together, this has kind of the most interesting evolution because it started, my very first ideas on it go way, way back to like 2012, 2013, and I did some sketches. I wanted to do some elf oriented stuff because I love fantasies, and I've always been interested in sort of the imagery, the iconography of elves and stuff. That developed into a story that I started writing and drawing. So there's a comic that I've drawn. There's probably about 50 pages of it, of the same character as an adult under a completely other different name. And I kept working on this on the side, waiting for the opportunity for my schedule to, when it really clears up, then I could tackle it. All these other things, luckily there were good things kept happening. These other opportunities, like the Powers TV show happened. So that ate up a lot of time. And then Cave Carson came around and stuff. But at one point there was a company, they're still around, they're still doing really great comics for your phone called Stila.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to then do, when they approached me and the deal was really good, we were going to take that and then make sort of a prequel out of this original comic, and it was going to be called Afterworld.
Mm-hmm.
And we developed it for this site, and it had a completely different kind of template to the page and stuff. And Taki was going to color it, help me write and edit it. And then eventually that deal kind of fell apart. So then I had all this work that I had done both on this comic and on this like digital platform thing that was in a completely different
Yeah, it
format.
was an infinity scroll.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, Stila was really interesting. I mean, it was like purely mobile oriented, which I thought was a really cool wrinkle to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, then at this point, then I ended up having between the original comic I did and the amount of work that I started to do for that version of After Realm,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess like altogether like 80 pages or something like that. Like just this huge amount of work just sitting there. And again, just other good opportunities kept coming up, and I just realized, well, I've got enough material now. If I was to launch this as a webcomic, we've got a good backlog, and we could take it very slow so we could learn as we're going. Taki and I had done webcomics before, but I never ran them. I just did the content for them. Taki ran her own, but the
And that
landscape
was like
different.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been such a long time. And yeah, I'm just curious as to where this has gone since then and what kind of audience we can reach that's, who aren't reading comics, but I know there are like people who just exclusively read webcomics.
Mm-hmm.
Want to reach those kinds of people too.
And because we deal largely in print comics, and even though we're pretty successful, honestly, I know that more eyes would be on our work with a webcomic. More people are reading and looking at webcomics than they are actual physical print comics. That's just because of the internet and the way comics are distributed and stuff.
Or so we've heard. So we're just learning.
Yeah.
We're curious more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
No,
So it's a big learning experience.
it is really interesting. I mean, I was kind of like looking through your guys's like past and like what you've worked in before. I mean, Mike, you alone, you've Takio was a graphic novel. You've done miniseries and ongoings. You've made comics at the big two at Image and a bunch of very small publishers. And webcomics. You did the Team Fortress 2 comic at webcomics. It seems like you guys have kind of done a little bit of everything. And is it partially, is this like, I don't want to call it an experiment because that seems insulting. But I mean, is it just kind of exploring other formats and seeing how much reach you can really get out of it?
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yep, you got that.
And by looking at our past experiences on doing all these different diverse projects is because we love storytelling and we want to do it in different avenues. One of the things I'm loving right now, even though it's super early on, I love being able to instantly fix or change something. Like a mistake in comics is in print. It's done.
Right.
But it's been interesting to have people say, oh, that word's a run-on sentence, or I couldn't really tell what was going on in the background there or something. So I could just go in, lighten up that background or fix that lettering instantly, and it's changed, and that's amazing.
Fixed. Yep.
It is. I feel like that's like a slippery slope, though. It's like you could just keep going back and fixing things forever.
Well, we've got a lot of self-control. Like we're good at editing, because I've reprinted books where I've had the opportunity to change things and stuff, and I'd rather just be warts and all, unless it's something egregious,
Mm-hmm. I remember going back to what you guys were talking about, how reaching like a larger audience and everything. I remember I talked to Rick Burchett about Lady Saber, the book he did with Greg Rucka, or the webcomic he did with Greg Rucka. And
Greg,
I remember he was saying that at Emerald City when I chatted with him, he was saying he's like, I've done like a lot of comics, a lot of formats, but Lady Saber is being read by way more people than anything he had done before. And it was right when they were going through the print campaign that they did for Kickstarter. But I thought that was interesting. It's interesting that like you guys are totally right that like webcomics could get far more reach than the typical stuff we see in the direct market distribution model or even the book market distribution model.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like X-Men sells like, I don't know, like 100,000 copies or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of 5 books maybe that are selling 100,000 copies.
Sure.
Don't really know what's even selling that high now, but look at the amount of webcomics that have 100,000 or more followers or eyes on it. It's way more than the amount of comics that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to share our stories.
Yeah. So I figure I should probably ask this just for listeners, like what Taki, maybe you can walk me through this. What is the Afterrealm all about?
Boy, I think that Mike will have to answer that question.
Taki's coloring it, and she's helping me as a soundboard, story-wise and stuff. I mean, the gist of it is about it takes place after the end of everything. Again, it's another apocalypse story. It's after Ragnarok and the apocalypse, and the end of the Yuga cycles happen across the realms and all the different realms of society.
Mm-hmm.
And the elves have retreated back to their realm, which is in another dimension, basically. And there's one elf, Una. She was best friends with this kid when she was out in the world before Ragnarok happened. It separated the two of them. She doesn't fit into the world that she's in, with the other elves and stuff, which is all. It's very rigid with the rules that it has to follow, and she's kind of a trickster and a smartass and stuff. So it's your typical, like, she doesn't quite fit in. But she really, really, really wants to get out of the world that she's in, to reunite with her best friend and to map what's become of the world. So she wants to join these rangers that are being trained to set out into the world after the elves have retreated for so long, and they want to see what's become of the old gods and everything. So her goal to become a ranger is really the secret, selfish goal that she wants to reunite with her best friend. So that's the gist of it. So this first story is about her becoming a ranger, and why she has trouble becoming a ranger is because of it's sort of a secret that'll come out later on. And it's the very things that keep her from being a ranger that's also going to save everybody when things kind of hit the fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know that she's fibbed about something, or she was facetious or joked about something, and it impacted her ability to be a ranger. That's really all we have so far. I'm guessing that's the secret you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things will be revealed.
Yeah, no. It's really great. Like I actually love the second page where it kind of shows like the world and it unraveling, and I think it's like turning into a snake, if I remember correctly. Like that whole page is just fantastic, and I love like how you've embraced like the fantasy vibe, which we don't really kind of get in full all the time, even when we do have fantasy comics. Like where does this come from? Like what are some of the influences? Weirdly, and I do want to note really quick. Weirdly, I kind of got like a very lighthearted Mignola vibe from it, which was kind of interesting.
Oh, definitely. Well, I'm a huge Mignola fan. I'm a huge fan of fantasy. A lot of my comics work is built around fantasy. I wrote Thor for a while, Thor Ragnarok, in fact. So that was fun.
It was great.
Movies. So I love fantasy. So this is definitely steeped in fantasy, and that was one of the other issues why. Oh, that's one of the other reasons I really want to do this webcomic, is because right now print comics, there's been this huge boom in fantasy books to the point that the market's kind of flooded on it. So the other thing was with a print comic, it would just be one of another billion other fantasy books. Even with my name, which has been built over the years and stuff, it's still a saturated market. And I noticed that the fantasy webcomics that are out there, the majority of them are straight out comedy fantasy, which is great. But that's what was kind of fun about this, is that it is a little more straightforward, like a straightforward narrative. And it is meant to be fun. It's meant to be fun and lighthearted. To the point that it kind of shocked me at one point. I realized the lack of violence that's actually in it, because most of my work is pretty violent on some level. So I was really happy that I was able to create something that pretty much anybody could read, and that the tone was fun. Because the other problem is, with a lot of my work being dark, I'm just sitting in this dark world all the time. Like the 6 months I spent doing a graphic novel about Aleister Crowley and Adolf Hitler.
Oh my god,
that was depressing, man. So it was nice to draw something that's fun. So that's if you're looking for fun fantasy, this is it. And I think adults can read it, and you can read it with younger audiences too. But it's not aimed specifically at younger audiences. It's really just for me,
right?
And then and because it comes from my heart, I'm hoping that resonates.
I do really like, one of the things that's cool about webcomics is like you can do what Rick and Greg did with Lady Saber, when they published it as a webcomic, and then eventually they did a print edition for the people who would prefer to read in print. And it's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to call it double dipping, because it can be fairly difficult to monetize webcomics, but at the same time, it's like doing it in webcomics gives you the control you kind of want, while also giving you the ability to make money off of it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely print it at some point. I'm not too worried about that now, just because the story's long enough. That's really quite a way off. We do also have a Patreon, because that's part of the sort of new model of things. And again, like the comic, we're taking it very slow. I haven't even tweeted out that I have a Patreon yet. Like I want to get feedback on the mistakes, feedback on what I'm doing right. Maybe I'll change up things. That's. These early days is really just, it's a lot of learning.
Yeah. That was one thing I was going to ask, is like how much, I imagine was there a bit of a learning curve kind of jumping back into things like webcomics, or I've seen you've been working with animation, like you animated the very first page, you did another animation on your Patreon. Like how much is the learning curve getting into things like that?
I just stumbled upon the animation thing of just creating really simple GIFs, just because I saw another artist who I admire do it, and then I figured it out really quickly. It was pretty simple. So I wanted to
figure it out in like afternoon.
Yeah. So I want to learn to do more. Nothing too extensive, but just enough to grab the eye. Seeing a little bit of movement when you're scrolling through social media and stuff like that. I think it grabs people's eyes and stuff.
Yeah.
But this is a big learning like we were just going crazy, just trying to figure out how to use WordPress as a comic.
Yeah.
You know, and eventually we want to upgrade the plugins to use something that's a little more advanced. But right now, just figuring that out was a nightmare.
Well, we learned.
But yeah, we figured it
out. I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's starting. I mean, I think it's actually smart to kind of do a soft launch type thing, because then you can kind of you can get through the rough patch before you start pushing it out to everybody completely. But I mean, it's a great start. It's a great looking comic. I mean, the Patreon is a great move. I have a Patreon. I have to admit, like, one of the weird things about Patreons is, like, I have this weird feeling. It's like I kind of want to make it a secret. My wife always makes fun of me because I don't want to tell people about it because I feel sheepish about it. And I did think it was funny that in the very first line of your own Patreon, you're like, I know, why does Mike Oeming have a Patreon? I'm sure you're asking yourself that.
Yeah, because I mean, I see other comic pros before I've done it, and I never really understood why. You know, if you're just looking at it from a distance, you know, you don't realize, well, like, all right, so even though it seems easy, we're putting out these free webcomics, it's still a lot of work that I've done. This is a lot of hours. You know, it's the same thing with your podcast. You know, it's not like you just hop on the microphone and you start your show thing and your podcast is just as long as it airs. There's hours of preparation before you get to do anything. There's so much work involved that's not just the art or just your podcast. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it makes sense. It makes sense, and I understand. And also, that's just the way the economy is going. That's the way that the new platforms are. You know, there's a new economy out there that's all built on building your own audience. And you know, I'm not setting up in such a way that if you're a fan of my print comics, you have to, you know, hop onto Patreon to follow me and stuff. It really is aimed at the webcomics audience. But there's, you know, reasons for people who just like my print as well.
Yeah, but Patreon is basically like it's a choice that people are making, and I think that's a wonderful way to like approach monetizing your creations. Mm-hmm. You know, because it's a choice, because it's not like forced upon you, and there's like a set price for each increment. Like, you can pay more if you want, or you don't have to pay. Or,
there's no price for entry for this webcomic, and most webcomics, you know, they're free.
Yeah.
And this just comes at another level if you want to see more of the behind the scenes stuff. One of the things I offer is like, I'll do in-depth videos over the page and stuff where on Twitter, my other social media stuff, I usually show like videos that are just quick time-lapse things, but I rarely ever communicate on them. Mm-hmm. So on a Patreon, like, the hope is if you actually want to know a little bit more behind the curtain kind of stuff, I'll give you those views. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's a viable way to look at income in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of funny when you think about it. Like, we're in the future now, and it's like we've actually regressed to the point where we're using like Patron of the Arts programs because it's so hard to make money off the internet. It is kind of funny how that works out, but I love Patreon. I think it's fantastic. Yeah. And it's like, it's a really great way to interact with people who want to support your work. And also it's like, it's not like you're not busy. That was one thing I was going to ask about. Like, you mentioned on your Patreon that you're working on Powers and United States of Murder Inc. And then on top of that, you're also doing Cape Carson stuff. But then you're doing After Realm. It kind of seems like you're always juggling multiple projects. Is it just you constantly want to be telling stories? Like, how does that end up working out?
Yeah, all of my self-identity and self-worth comes through my work. So without it, I get like depressed and crazy. And
he doesn't have a schedule that kind of drives him crazy, that will drive him crazy.
Yeah.
Like, if he's not juggling like so many things that he's kind of worried about deadlines and stuff, he's like depressed. He's just like, I'm not doing enough.
Yeah, and also a lot of those projects, like they're not all overlapping at the same time.
Sure.
So a lot of them are active projects, but they're not daily projects. Like Cape Carson, as the scripts come in, that's a monthly book. That's a daily thing. But I can do that and some other stuff at the same time. Sometimes I just need to shift gears. Mm-hmm. You know, I need to work on something that's not Cave or not Powers or not After Realm.
Mm-hmm. Or not a graphic novel about Hitler.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I do think that's really interesting, especially. So how long, just for a personal curiosity standpoint, like how long does it take you to do, like, let's say an issue of Cape Carson? Like, it sounds like you're pretty fast. Yeah,
I mean, I've done an issue of Cave in like 2.5 weeks, and that was really going crazy, you know. But I'm just fairly fast, and again, when we're talking about like digital technology and Patreon and all this stuff, was just learning to work completely digitally changes things too. There's a difference in execution, but there's the time. You cannot compare how much faster it is to draw digitally than it is with paper. Just subtract the time it takes to not dip your pen into ink anymore. Just subtract the time it takes to erase a page. Subtract the time it takes to scan a page and to fill in black and all this stuff. And I mean, I can sit at the Cintiq and start a page and finish a page, basically not getting up if I'm disciplined about it in a couple of hours. So I mean, I can do. I'm happy when I do 2 pages a day of pencils and inks.
Wow. Yeah, that's
it is fairly fast, but I have a simple style, so that helps.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, it's like I think it's like Steve Lieber is very big on always talking about storytelling above all, basically, and I like your style is. It's interesting. It's like you describe it as simple, but at the same time, it's like it is so singularly you that it also doesn't really feel simple because it's like the Oeming style. It's the thing.
Well, I appreciate that because I always feel like I'm always questioning my techniques and what I'm doing, and does this? Who am I as an artist? That's constantly haunting me. But in a way, I like that because it feels like there's dogs nipping at my feet and I have to keep going.
Yeah, I mean that the competition is always a very underrated, like the competitive element is always a very underrated part of getting great at things. I mean, one of the things that I kind of joke about this sometimes, but part of the reason why I always say that I've become a good writer is because I want to destroy all their people who write about comics secretly.
Yeah.
Not much of a secret anymore.
Yeah. not that you put it in the podcast.
Exactly. But I wanted to talk about how you guys work. So, Taki, you're doing colors and you're kind of like a story sounding board, but like what is the process like when you were first developing this? Like did you guys kind of plot out like a kind of season or like a certain length of pages before you dove into it, or how did you guys work?
Well, it's kind of a weird project because we don't have an editor, we don't have a publisher, so this is just us doing whatever the hell we want. And so the story could go as long or as short as we wanted it to go. And there are 2 levels of the storytelling in this particular title.
Mm-hmm.
So like you have this webcomic version, which takes place when she's still a young girl, and then there's a story that takes place when she's an adult, and it's unending. It's just an open world, so it's kind of an interesting storytelling that we're kind of approaching. We don't have to end it if we don't want to.
Well, one of the things that I really like that Taki's a big contributor in telling the story is the way she tells a story with colors. So when you look at her colors, like Una the character isn't literally blue,
right?
Or some of those backgrounds aren't literally those abstract colors that they are. Like she tells colors to express mood and a setting. And it's something that she learned from doing Murder Incorporated, where she had never colored before. And this is what she came up with, and we were like, oh my god, it's genius, because it's like sometimes the less you know about something, the braver your choices are.
Right.
And out of that came this amazing storytelling that she's doing with colors. Like explain why you do certain things.
Yeah, so I would choose a color for the background, and I'll choose a color for the figures, and it just kind of depends on what's going on in a scene. So if a scene is a character is planning something sinister, I would maybe do some, like the figures will be like maybe green and kind of lime green kind of skin tone with green everything else. The clothing and hair and everything is green, and maybe the background, because it's sinister, maybe like bluish purple. And and I'll follow that scene through with those colors scheme, and I'll go into another scene, and like it'll just completely change everything. Like the same character that was in the last scene will have a different skin color and hair color because of the mood and what's going on in a scene.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have certain rules, like in well, actually,
Link
all,
and
all the things we've colored, like usually the main character has one aspect that stays the same, like the hair color on Jagger in United States of Murder, or the red
well, Jagger
color.
is the only character who has consistent hair color and her suit that she wears,
Yeah.
the red suit. Or like, yeah, Una, all of her costumes and her hair color stays consistent, but her skin color and everything is the same as everybody else.
That's awesome. I do think that there's something to be said about what you were saying earlier, Mike, about how like somebody who's coming in from a perspective that's like you're not so beholden to rules, so you start doing things a little bit different. And like one thing I like about the colors that you're doing, Taki, is it definitely evokes a mood. It has a different feel to it, and it's like that's one of the things I think is most amazing about colors in comics in particular is the way that like colorists use color to make people feel things without them even realizing it. It's like almost like there's an intangible feel to, or intangible aspect to coloring that like you don't even realize is happening as you're reading it. It's just happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, color can be a character, can be a part of telling a story, just like lighting can be. Lighting can actually be a character. Like in Blade Runner, both the original and the remake, they used light in this abstract way that really made no sense. But it told the story. It was a character. It brought things alive.
Yeah.
Right. So for the rest of the process, like how you're according to the Patreon right now, you're doing 4 pages a month, Mike. Like how are you approaching it? Do you already kind of have like a stash of pages done, or is it just kind of you're working it as you have time, basically?
I've got a lot of pages finished.
Right.
So we never have to worry about it being late, even if we get enough followers and we bump up the amount of pages that come out a week. Like we're
or
pretty.
if we get really busy with other projects.
Right.
Yeah, but I do have. I think the entire story is actually laid out. So like at least in the laid out, like a light pencil breakdown form, it is roughly like between 90 and 100 pages. So anytime I have time or the inclination to want to sit down, I've actually, I've got the storytelling worked out. I just sit down, and just start drawing. So it's really fun. I mean, that's the thing I say to anybody who's in comics, whether they're web comics or print comics, is you really have to be in this because you love it. Why else would I have drawn 40-something pages of a comic with no plans of publishing it yet?
Right.
It's because I just know I'm going to do it. I love the book. I love the idea, the project, and time will tell when it comes out and how it comes out. I had no idea it would be a webcomic. I never would have thought that at the time. But you do the work because you love it, and then hopefully you can make a living.
I think that's the thing that's really cool about it, and the reason why I immediately jumped on it. I mean, I like I always have enjoyed the stuff you guys have done, both together and beyond. And the thing is like this is like clearly a passion project. It's something you're doing because it's just a story you want to tell, and like that's always the type of story that I most want to support. And I think that's really great. But I was really interested in a line you had on your Patreon about how you said you've become interested in returning to webcomics as an alternative to traditional comics, where you can set your own rules and schedules. I thought that was really cool. But I'm kind of curious, like, how are you approaching the After Realm differently in any way besides schedule? Like, are you trying to do things different with your art? Are you trying to do anything different like that? Or is it pretty much the same when it comes to process?
Not entirely different, really. It's pretty close to being the same. One of the reasons for that, too, is because this was already designed to be 2 different incarnations before it became a comic.
Right.
I'm kind of reverse engineering, especially the earlier pages. So then, now the pages that I started to do after what would have been the Stila stuff, that's when I was able to actually start to design those pages to be specifically for a comic book or for a webcomic and the comic layout. So like the early pages are really kind of paced just however I could. Yeah, it's a little Frankenstein. That's just how I could get it from the original format. What'll be interesting is once the story is told and I've learned all these things, I'm hoping we'll be able to tell more stories of Una in the After Realm, or something different, or maybe even both, depending on how much of an audience we can build. And then it'll be really interesting to challenge myself, like, oh, okay, well, what can I do now that I really know the format? What are some storytelling things I could do? Like, I learned a lot from Taki. She has a webcomic that she's returning to, and she had started some years ago called You'll Never Die, where she had to pace each page out to be kind of an event, each page.
Each page had to have something happen. You can't just, because I was doing a page a week.
Mm-hmm.
So each page had to have some interest. You can't just have a moment happen, because that's not a story. That's not, that's not anything.
It almost had to feel like a beginning, middle, and end for each page.
So I learned how to edit edit myself really well, I think. And yeah, put as much in a page as possible without sacrificing story and pacing.
Yeah, like sometimes in this, like early on, I'll probably occasionally post 2 pages during the week, like at the same time, because some of the pages turned out to be like a splash page that's a close up of somebody's face.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm confident in just doing this very slowly, at the same time, if you're waiting a week for the page to come by and it's a splash page of somebody, just one single shot close up of the face, like I would not pace that way now in making a webcomic. But that's just how the story came together. So I do really, really look forward to just learning new tricks and trying to do some new stuff.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time in comics trying to figure out how to break the rules in a way that work. Like how to make the eye go from right to left instead of left to right. How do I break up the panels in a way that's just hasn't really been seen before? So I'm looking forward to trying more of that with the actual webcomic.
Well, and also with webcomic too, like we all want to have your webcomic end up in a print form.
Mm-hmm.
So you also have to keep that in mind as you tell these stories, and you can't just break too far away from the traditional because you want it in print eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's also why whatever webcomic I'll do, I'll be thinking about the page format. Like I used to go crazy about like, what is the aspect ratio do you want? Like we had long arguments about this at Valve when we were doing Team Fortress. Like what should the aspect ratio be for the webcomic? And it's only now that I realize, well, ultimately, if it will eventually live in print, that's the only thing to keep in mind. And you can print it as widescreen. You can print it as a regular size comic. I'm choosing to stick, at least with this, as regular comic book pages, just because I know that's an easy market for me to go to immediately, and I know that retailers don't like odd shaped books.
Right.
It's hard to stack. It's hard to, sell and stuff. But maybe I'll do something like Victor Santos, who's a good friend of ours. He did Polar.
Mm-hmm.
Which was just optioned for a film and stuff. And he just did it. He did the sort of widescreen aspect ratio and printed it with Dark Horse, and it looked beautiful.
Yeah, I one of my favorite webcomics is by John Allison. It's Bad Machinery. It's now actually ended, but he keeps doing a Scary Go Round and other webcomics he's been doing for forever. And it is like widescreen. It's printed like the old Calvin and Hobbes books. And it comes from Oeming Press, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. But they just came out with like a new digest editions, I believe it is, and I don't really know what the format is. But I think that he was just basically adjusting his pages to match it afterwards, and I think that stuff is really interesting. And Taki, one of the things you said I thought was interesting was about how your webcomic, you try to make every page kind of like an event, like something has to happen on it, and that's one thing I'm always curious about is how much, like, the way that people engage with comics in the different formats changes how you approach the stories itself, because like you want to make sure like that 1-page update in a week or whatever is worth it for the reader. But some readers like me, with that Bad Machinery comic I was talking about, I ended up basically reading what was like 6 years of John Allison's life in like 2 sittings. I just binge read it because I was addicted to it. And it's funny because like I wonder how often that happens too, where like people just kind of binge read webcomics.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why a lot of webcomics only come out at a certain pace.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you're telling the story as it's going along, then audience have no option except to follow it up every week or 5 weeks, however you put it. But if you go back and like binge read, but I think that still works too, because like I said, I want my webcomic to end up in print format anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I want them to read in that way. So I think it kind of works out.
Yeah, and I've already imagined, I mean, I know that there are people reading it every week as it comes out, even though it's only been 2 weeks. But I also know or imagine that there's many people who just check in from the time to time, see how many pages there are to see if it's worth their time to read yet.
Mm-hmm.
And again, instead of looking at it as a challenge or a bad thing, as long as you're looking at these things in the long run, like I'm not looking to turn around money tomorrow. I'm not looking to have an audience tomorrow. This is about building an audience. This is about building relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's fine. Some people are going to wait 6 months before they even really try it. Even hardcore fans of mine.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
I do too. I mean, I think it's really cool that you get to do something like this. That I mean, it does seem like your other opportunities and what you've done elsewhere and what you are doing elsewhere like affords you the opportunity to do a passion project like this. And I think for most comic creators, that type of thing is a dream.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I spent most of my career building it around creator-owned stuff, and I'm also lucky in my speed and particular passion to want to do this stuff. I know a lot of guys who are much more talented than I am, and they're happy to just draw, a company book, and they don't need to, branch out to do other stuff. I guess I'm very blessed. I mean, this is a hard industry to make a living in. It's really tough. And if I didn't have friends like Brian Bendis and relationships with Marvel and DC and editors over the years and stuff, again, a lot of it is it's evergreen. It's putting in the time.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my fans now are fans because they read me when they were kids. They were literally kids reading it.
Yeah, thanks for making us feel really old.
I kind of realized I accidentally had a 20-year plan. Start drawing comics in the early 90s.
Yeah.
By the time the mid 2020 comes around, I'll be able to make a living.
The kids who listen to this podcast are going to be so confused by the Doritos 3D conversation.
Oh, God.
They're going to like, what are they talking about? Doritos 3D? What does that even mean? Aren't all Doritos 3D?
It's the perfect food.
I have to admit, it made me want to actually find them because I never tried them when they were actually out. And I'm like, I want to know what that's like. It just seems great.
It's weird because I'm sure you've had Doritos before, right?
Of course, yeah.
Of course. So it tastes good.
Yeah.
And you add this kind of fluffiness to it.
You hear the passion in her voice.
Oh, yeah.
It becomes something else. They're not Doritos.
It transforms like a Hannibal Lecter victim.
Yes. Yes. Oh, man. And you can't stop. So
yeah.
I guess in hindsight, I guess it's a good thing that they, took it off the market, because I'm pretty sure they found out that it's people are becoming addicted and everybody's dying from heart disease or something.
Yeah, much like Dune, her lips would just be stained with the spice of 3D Doritos.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like everybody kind of has that food where it's I feel like if Doritos did a study, they'd be like, wow, there is an unbelievable amount of Doritos 3Ds that were sold in this area during the time it was all being sold to you. And for me, I when I was in college, I was much larger than I am now, and one of the ways that I lost weight was I started eating this cereal called Kashi Goleen, and now I am basically I eat Kashi Goleen every day of my life, more or less. And it's funny, I think if Kashi actually did analysis, they're it appears that 75% of our Kashi Goleen is sold to this man in Alaska.
That's
funny.
Hilarious. Oh my God.
And Taki has there's a chip out there named Takis, but I don't think we've ever bothered with them.
Well, it's not three-dimensional. It doesn't have the fluffiness.
It's really crunchy and it's really salty. It's pretty good. But I'm older. I have cholesterol problems, and I have MS.
Yeah.
That it's just I can't eat any of that stuff anymore.
Oh.
Which really makes me sad because I'm very passionate about snack foods.
Yeah, she has a special room for it. She's waiting to reopen the 3D Dorito room, and it's got cherry Coke is in there, some parachute pants,
Crystal
the high top
Pepsi
fade waiting for her.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
but no, seriously, I'm one of those people who will actually contact Nestle and all these snack foods companies and ask them if they have a limited edition something, and if I really like it, I'm can you try consider making this permanent, or I'll just write to them and be just be passionate about it, oh This stuff was so good. I just wanted to just let you know.
And this, I'm pretty sure you brought back dill pickles. I remember you, or dill potato
Dill
chips.
pickle flavored potato chips.
You contacted them, and it was literally like 6 months later we started seeing them showing up in the store.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've always had dill pickle flavored potato chips around. It was just always around. And since I moved away from there, like, I have not seen any dill pickle potato chips. I'm like, what is going on? What is this desert that I'm living in? And like, I get dill pickle flavored potato chips. And we moved to the Seattle area, and there was a local like potato chip company that I found, and I really like their stuff. It's called Tim's.
Oh yeah.
And I contacted them. I'm like, oh my God, what you guys need to do is bring me some dill pickle flavored potato chips. I will definitely buy them. Just consider it. And they wrote back, and they're like, oh, we used to have dill pickle flavored potato chips, but we don't make them anymore. And I'm like, oh, that's too bad.
Then about
6 months later,
Oh my God.
they came out with it.
See, you know what you need to do? Tie this full circle. You need to create a web comic that's about like nostalgia foods, and then people will start reading it, and then it'll start becoming this internet phenomenon. And next thing you know, all of your foods will return.
Yeah, and I'll die of a heart attack.
Then you'll die of a heart attack.
And you see, this is where ideas come from. Like I said, just listening. Like, because that is legitimately a good idea. You're joking, but that is a good idea.
Yeah.
One of your listeners should rush out and do that.
Yeah, but only the ones that you guys want. And the ones I want. I actually, in my mind, the sad thing though is like in my mind, Crystal Pepsi was far better than actual Pepsi. But I think if I tried it now, it'd probably be terrible.
You're dead to me. That shit was nasty.
Well, I was a kid. I like anything that had sugar in it, and I was like, give it to me.
Yeah.
I was a kid, and I still liked regular Pepsi better.
Okay, well, I'm sure I probably would now. I'm sure if I had it. I remember I knew someone who actually bought a can off eBay. I'm like, what are you going to do with that? Don't
can't
drink
open
it. Yeah, it'd be disgusting.
Open it, and like, if it's been old enough, like the what do you call it? The carbonation is gone.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't opened it, like if it's been like I don't know, several years or whatever, like beyond the expiration date, then it's not fizzy anymore.
Yeah.
Huh.
That
kind of like virginity. Like if you don't use it, it just goes away.
Oh, is that how it happens?
That's exactly what it's like. Okay, so last question I want to ask about the Afterrealm. You guys you're doing the 4 pages right now per month until you reach an unsaid goal level on Patreon, at which point you'll start dropping 6 pages a month. So like what is like do you guys have kind of like an in-game vision for this? Is like there a goal of what you're going for? Or is this just like a project that you're going to kind of take on as time allows and as money allows?
I would like for it to become a problem. I want it to become successful enough that I have to think about how am I going to balance this with my regular comics work.
Right.
Then I'll be happy to fit. Like I want it to be big enough that I have to make a consideration. Like how much time am I going to spend on comics? How much time am I going to spend on webcomics? I love the immediacy of it. Like one of the tough things with comics, and I've had ideas like this happen where they'll sit around so long between figuring out when the right time is to market to do it or when the right time to release it will be, that something else similar will come along, or there becomes a glut in the market, like with the fantasy thing right now. Because I started this before the glut in the market had happened. And, that kind of thing happens all the time. So I really look forward to the day where I say, oh, here's a great idea and I want to do it. And maybe it doesn't need to be long enough to actually be a comic, but it would be long enough to be a great webcomic. Or, just, again, the freedom of not having to worry about the formatting and stuff. So so we're serious about this. So anybody who's really interested in following
that
through.
That is our ultimate goal, that it becomes so successful that we're just like, oh, my God.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's
that's the ultimate goal. But we're just trying to figure it out and see if it can get there. I
want Scott Kurtz to come to me and say, Mike, can you help us promote this next webcomic? That's how big I want it to be. I was saying that I love Scott. Scott's awesome. And his crew people have been a big help behind the scenes, like with advice and stuff with us, and they're good guys, good people there.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing I was going to say is like the nice thing about you know, when I did this panel at a con recently up here in Alaska, and I was talking to two of the people in the audience were these two young women who were working on their own webcomics, and they asked a question about how do you do webcomics, how do you break into it, and it's like they had no idea, and they didn't really have any frame of reference or anyone to go to. So having like, I'm not trying to make you feel bad or like feel blessed or anything like that, but it is nice to have like somebody to turn to, like Scott or like whomever.
Absolutely. And your audience. I mean, talking to you is great, and I think we're going to continue talking to you for some advice and feedback and stuff. And I want to ask your audience out there, even if you don't participate in, like, say, the Patreon page, just take a look at it and leave a comment of you know, if you think something's working or not working. Same thing with the webpage. On the comic page, you can leave comments and stuff. Let us know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. We totally want to be part of the learning process and make it a better experience for everybody.
It's collaborative comics.
Yes.
Where the audience is part of it. Yeah,
they're my editor. They keep telling me I'm spelling stuff wrong.
Speaking of, I want to talk to you about something. No, actually, I was going to give you one suggestion. So for that Bad Machinery comic that I was talking about earlier, and also, and there's a couple webcomics that do this. Well, one thing I really like on webcomics is when they make the image actually clickable. So when you click on it, it goes to the next page. That way, you just tap on the image, it moves on to the next page, and it kind of creates this nice flow where you just click on it and you go, and so on and so forth. I don't know how easy that is. I make it sound really simple, but that might be something to look at.
I think when we upgrade, we'll eventually upgrade with more professional looking plugins. Right now, we're using the most basic of setups on WordPress, and so it doesn't have that feature yet. But that and like be able to make the logo more professional looking and bigger and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that would definitely be a good idea, because then people could look at it full screen and just click through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited for everybody to check out the Afterrealm once you're through the soft launch. You know, listeners, go check it out. I'll have all the information in both the outro for this and also in the post. But guys, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about the Afterrealm and Doritos 3D and everything else.
Well, thank you for having us here.
Thanks so much, man. Thank you all you guys for listening and stopping by the Afterrealm.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Michael Oeming and Taki Soma. You can find him on Twitter at Oeming and at Taki Soma, on his website at michaelavanoeming.com, their webcomic at theafterrealm.com, and on Patreon at patreon.com/Oeming. You can also find them in comics like United States of Murder Inc., Powers, and Cape Carson Has a Cybernetic Eye. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Andrew Scott, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corgan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Borander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe at iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. Quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track, Outro, from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.